Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And this is the Pop Cult Podcast. Later today in this episode, we'll be doing a tribute to Gena Rowlands by looking at her film Opening Night. But first, we're going to do another throwback to 1994's The Crow. The night before his wedding, musician Eric Draven, played by Brandon Lee, and his fiancée are brutally murdered by members of a violent inner-city gang. On the anniversary of their death, Eric rises from the grave and assumes the gothic mantle of the Crow, a supernatural avenger. Tracking down the thugs responsible for the crimes and mercilessly murdering them, Eric eventually confronts head gangster Top Dollar to complete his macabre mission. So this was my first time ever seeing this film.
Yeah.
I was very aware of it in 1994 when it came out through all the like comic book magazines that I would buy. It was being heavily promoted. There was lots of like tie-in stuff. And then especially because Brandon Lee was tragically killed on the set. Like that was a big reason why it was in the news. And so this is my first time seeing it. Ariana, you had seen it many times before.
Multiple times. I have an older brother who loves metal or loved metal and
Would you
loves
consider
comic
the
books.
music in this metal?
I think it's kind of like in the relation to like emo-ish
Yeah, it was
music.
very emo-y.
But the reason that like it's a metal icon is like the fucking okay, so this was like before the Matrix. So when the Gothics were wearing those trench coats, it's starting because
I would
of this.
say if this movie was made in like 2001, Evanescence would have been on the soundtrack.
Yep.
Like it's that kind of movie. So what are your childhood memories of The Crow?
I mean, like I remember it felt very like action packed and a lot of stuff was going on versus now I feel like the premise feels simple. The problem is there's just too many fucking characters.
It's also boring as fuck.
Yes, to a certain
Like-
point it is boring.
No, not to a certain point. It is a slog.
Okay, I understand that.
Once the premise is started, it's like leading up to him coming back as the Crow, I was engaged. I was like, oh, okay, very stylized.
Yes.
And so like visually it was kind of interesting. And then we introduce, we have Eric come back, he becomes the Crow, and that is where the movie goes downhill and just becomes so boring to me.
Yeah.
Because it's just, he's gonna kill all of them.
Yes.
There's no way the movie's going to end with him not doing that. So there's no real twists or surprises along the way. It's just kind of, and then the Crow kills that guy. And then the Crow kills that guy. And then he's working his way up the ladder and he's going to kill the top guy last. And then he's going to like go back into the grave or something. And like, that'll be it.
I think the problem is the story is just messy. So we have Ernie Hudson, known mostly from Ghostbusters, playing
Sergeant Albrecht,
which who is demoted because he's been investigating Eric and Shelley's like deaths. And it had to do with the fact that like apparently Shelley was like fighting eviction notices.
Well, it's something about the building, I guess, was trying to be bought by some sort of evil developer.
Yeah. And she was fighting eviction notices for everybody there.
Yeah. So community advocate.
Yes. And so she is like brutally raped and murdered because of this in order to make people leave. And I think it's kind of a problem when you don't really settle that into, let me see a few people that happen to be their friends a year later leaving.
And part of the problem with this is Brandon Lee was murdered before they were fully able to film all the flashbacks of the death. So that sequence is where they used his stunt double and they actually did do some CG on the face. And I think establishing Shelley and that community was made kind of impossible because you want him to be there, but it would have been insanely hard to do that.
Yeah.
So that feels so rushed over. So I don't even really get a sense of who Shelley is. So I'm like, I mean, I guess I was his girlfriend. I'm sad, but I don't really know her.
She's just like hot with a really good heart. That's what you know about Shelley.
So one of my questions I wrote down.
So I'm being questioned.
Yeah. Discussion question. We're having a discussion. Is this movie well known because it is a good movie or because Brandon Lee died on set?
Oh boy, I think because he died on set.
Yeah,
And it
it's
has
not a good movie.
no, and I think this also has to do when we were watching the film, it has to do with like this whole thing about curses, right? So in the 1990s, there was like a big deal about like when you think about the Kennedy curse, that later on, like his son
It's
would
no
die
curse.
in
It's
that
just
plane.
people in certain occupations or positions. Like, yeah, John F. Kennedy Jr. was flying like private little like prop planes. That's a risky thing to do. In this case, it's Brandon Lee was on the set of a movie in which they were using real firearms that were supposed to have blanks in them. And when you read the story of like the props and like people noticing things on set retrospectively, like yeah, it's a risky thing. Alec Baldwin is responsible for
For the
the
death of
death of someone.
someone.
Yeah. And I'm like, I don't think Alec Baldwin intended to do that, but it was when you're on a set with firearms, yeah, the chance someone's going to get shot by accident goes up.
Yeah, and I think it also just it was it was the amplification of curses. So, you know who Brandon Lee's dad is, right?
I have what only wrong answers. Sarah Lee. The
Bradley?
Sarah Lee, the cake empire lady.
Yeah, she died tragically.
She died tragically in a baking accident. Wow, you're sick. We're talking about an American tragedy, randomly.
But yeah, like the fact that like his dad had died pretty young and then he dies pretty young. It's just it was also like the start of his career. Like I remember that when we were watching it, you saw his face. You were just like, "Oh yeah, no, he's got movie
Yeah,
star
he
quality."
had like just kind of this charisma that came off of him. Where you're like, oh yeah, I could see that guy being in lots of movies.
Yeah,
Like they wouldn't be great movies, but he'd be like, oh yeah, he's like an action movie star.
yeah.
You think of it, he could have been our next Steven Seagal. Think about if he had lived to this day, he could be some bloated weirdo that walks around in like Moscow all the time.
That, you know, conservatives love for
Yeah.
whatever reason. But yeah, like he tragically died. I think it also has to do with the aesthetics.
Yeah, his death does play into the gothy
Yeah,
tragedy
it's like
melodrama.
um this all I can think of is like Smashing Pumpkins like recalling this because it was dark and it was edgy and it was like because I remember even as a child just being deeply uncomfortable with like basically the rape of Shelley.
Well, it's a weird movie because it feels like it's going up to an edge, but then it's too scared to actually like do it then. So it's this weird like halfway there crap.
Yeah, like like for example, the whole like weird incesty vibe between well, it's not even a vibe. It is like either confirmed or some fucked up role play.
Between Top Dollar and Mika.
Yeah.
Are they supposed to be siblings? I wasn't sure when he said that that was his sister, like what that even meant. Because the dialogue was so bad that I was like, is that literal? Is she adopted? What are we talking about? It's like you're clearly not Chinese and she is.
And like it's also like, you know, how he's like daddy always said, and it was like never like our daddy said or our mother said.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh no, that's my sister. And people would be like, what? You guys were making out like 2 minutes ago.
You were talking about the tone, and one of the things that I saw as a problem was the characters are also broadly and melodramatically written that I never felt any of those big emotions the film was exuding. Like
Yeah.
no one's ever relatable. So you're just like, I am so sad that Eric died. Like that's the little girl's thing.
Yeah.
Or Eric is like, I am mad and want revenge. But like I get what their goals were. I understood what the characters' motivations were, but none of those emotions were conveyed so that I gave a damn what happened to
Yeah, I
anyone.
think the thing is like they flash to like a year after, and I think it probably is with the complications of not having flashbacks because you know, Brandon Lee died, but also like this weird thing that you're not setting up as to the consequences of this having happened. Like, is Sarah going to school on a regular basis?
Yeah. Well, then they like halfway through they bring her mother in or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I was like, at first I was like, oh, it sounded like she was kind of living with Eric and Shelley. But then I'm like, oh, I guess she wasn't. it's like her background is very confusing.
Yeah, and I think again because they didn't want to do flashbacks, even if you were like, oh, they're going
There's
to be
still, you can write
Shelley,
dialogue.
like there could have been like Shelley focused
Yeah.
like flashbacks. Like Brandon Lee did not need to be there essentially.
First person.
Oh, well, like
Do it, enter the
like
void.
you're saying that he is a musician, it makes sense. Maybe he's not always there, and it's just been like,
Or Sarah having a flashback about Shelley.
yeah,
Yeah.
or just being like, oh, Shelly got off the phone with Eric. He's gonna be home in 2 days. Let's set up the place to show that, we've missed him. And then like a brief conversation about Sarah lamenting the fact that her mom is a drug user and doesn't want to take care of her. And then like there's also like this quick thing of it being like, oh, Sergeant
Albrecht.
Albrecht was demoted, but we don't see like him being demoted. We're just seeing that it's like he's
It's all
now a
exposition.
beat cop.
There is a lot of like exposition in
Yeah.
place of showing us it
And
happening.
instead of and you're like, oh, he became friends with like Sarah, who grew up in an area that you think would be like fuck cops.
I was confused that like I was like, oh, they're friends? Because again, that's something that's just established in like implied dialogue.
Yeah.
And I'm like, does he know Sarah? Now he does know. I'm like, it was just the opening of the movie is so muddled.
Yeah, and then like year later they're having a hot dog together and he's not even like, it's like they're just hanging out, but he's not asking her about like what she's been doing.
Well, it's not written to show us that they know each other.
Like it's just, oh, he bought her a hot dog and that's it. It's just being like, oh, hey, how's school? I promise I'll be talking to your counselor later. And then maybe her like being sad at the fact that he's in the midst of getting divorced. It's a mess.
So it was made by Alex Proyas, and this was his first American feature film.
Okay.
He's Australian. He'd made some Australian film. I saw the title of it, never heard of this movie in my life.
Okay.
So I'm not I mean, I guess I know how he got this. This was a low budget movie. The fact that it was so well known was because the lead actor died on set. So in another timeline, this was just a sort of middling movie that came out, and there were some fans.
It would have been like a cult classic until Brandon Lee really got into the niche that he's supposed to be in.
But Proyas, when I look at his filmography, I've seen Dark City.
Yeah.
I've never been enamored with Dark City. I get like why people like it, I guess, from a visual perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always been like, this is like a really badly made movie. It's really it literally feels like a movie that they're just making up as they go along.
We watched that together like years ago.
Very stylish,
and
but
you were just like, oh, I heard a lot of people really like this film. And if you like Donnie Darko, you'll like this film. And we watched it, and I was just like, what was that?
He also made iRobot, which I have not seen.
I've not seen that. If I have, it's been years ago.
It was one of those where like I saw the trailer, I'd seen the movie.
With Will Smith?
Will Smith and Alan Tudyk is the robot.
I think I watched it a long
and
time
apparently
ago.
It's like a bastardization of Asimov's like source material, but
yeah, it's not good.
He made Knowing, which is a movie I don't think a lot of people have seen, and is a movie that I don't know if it's worth watching, but it was certainly an interesting film for me to watch. Written by Richard Kelly, who wrote Donnie Darko.
Oh boy.
And so this was a script he had sold before Donnie Darko had like become big, I think. But it came out, it was made after Donnie Darko, because then they were like, oh, this Richard Kelly guy, he's hot, let's get this movie made. Stars Nicolas Cage. It involves digging up a time capsule that an elementary school had buried so many years ago. And it turns out one of the kids that was a student there had some sort of like visionary ability and predicted the end of the world. So the whole movie is Nicholas, like there's an airplane crash that's a big set piece.
I feel like I saw the trailers for
The
this.
end of that movie has one of the craziest final shots I've ever seen in my life, where it's like a recreation of Adam and Eve on an alien planet, but with just like little kids that were rescued by aliens.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's a movie that is near incomprehensible.
I feel like this is like around the era that John Cusack was doing some weird horror films. Like,
what does that have to do with Nicolas Cage?
I think it's just like with Nicolas Cage, it was also like not really I cannot say that he
Nicolas
had.
Cage was doing like Ghost Rider at this time.
Yeah, it was like during that time that
It
you
was
didn't
big.
know
He was in big movies.
like what type of actor he was anymore, and
It
it
was
was
sort of post leaving Las Vegas,
yeah,
pre being becoming just a meme.
yeah.
And now he's shifted, which this Nicolas Cage era is the era I'm here for, which is the Nicolas Cage's. I get all the jokes, right? But I want to make movies that appeal to me. So that's why we get things like a Mandy or a Pig or a Longlegs.
Yeah,
And it's
mixed with the Freddy like
that Willy's
yeah.
Wonderland bullshit. Uh, but yeah, it's Proyas is not a director I think is very good. And
No.
while he is very stylish, one of my problems with The Crow was I don't understand the rules of this world. How hyper real is this world? How grounded is this world? And the movie kind of has its cake and eats it too. It keeps going back and forth between when it wants to be really surreal and strange, it'll present itself like that. If it wants to be very gritty and like grounded in crime, then it suddenly does that. And it just like ping pongs
Yeah,
back
I
and
think
forth.
the problem is again, this is a format that it was originally a comic book, so it should have stayed a comic book.
Oh, we're gonna talk about the comic in a minute. But things like
That's
well, no, there's
fine.
some really sad stuff.
Oh
about
no.
So like I felt Ernie Hudson's character did not work in this movie.
No.
Tonally, compare him to like these cartoon villains that are so like one-dimensional.
He feels like he should like it's almost like when because he smiles so much. So it feels like he's supposed to be the
He's always in a
comedy
different
relief.
movie.
Yeah.
And almost he should have been more of a central character because he's the mortal who cares about Eric and Shelley and all of this. So seeing it from his perspective makes the Crow a more mysterious figure.
Yeah, like let it be that he's he's waiting for like Sarah while they're gonna have like hot dogs and someone
You really just focus on these hot dogs. It's a crucial.
I eat lunch.
The hot dog motif in this movie, it's phallic imagery. It symbolizes the castration of Eric.
But okay, so like he gets radioed that Eric's like
Hungry for hot
grave
dogs. I'll stop. No,
that his grave has been disturbed and the body's been removed. And that he feels like something is following him around the city, but he can't pinpoint what. And because it's kind of like this mixed up, fucked up story, because it's like, here's a cop who is kind of like when all these other dudes that end up dying out of the revenge, he's never like, Eric, you shouldn't do this. Like, let the law take over.
Total vigilante, yeah.
Like, oh no, good. Thank you so much for killing.
Because it does turn out that like the top of it all, it's a villain who does have like power in the city. So it is like some sort of institutional power.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of I would say the meh movie.
Yeah.
Would I encourage people to go out and watch it? Not really. Your life isn't going to be any less because you didn't see The Crow. I mean, I haven't gained anything by seeing it. I was like, oh, now I know what that movie's about.
To me, because I think to me, having watched it when I watched it, and the thing is, like, this was a repeated movie. Not saying like, oh, we watched it so many times.
It got rented a lot from the video store.
A lot, and it was like it went through cycles. Like a year later, it was like my brother showing it to his friends.
Well, it's because like, he's every viewing of The Crow, you peel back the layer of the onion even further.
And the thing is, like, I think because you were homeschooled, there are certain aspects of it that you can't really let it, you can't savor it because I don't think you ever really met those goth boys that were like telling you that The Crow was their favorite movie.
I don't have to meet them to know that they're ridiculous white people who are just like cosplaying.
I know, but it's just like
anyway. Some history about this film.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about the comic in a minute.
Okay.
But when it was originally pitched to a studio, their choice was they wanted it to be a musical with Michael Jackson in the lead.
Oh my God.
When I tell you about the creator, it's going to make that hurt even more.
Okay.
So then at other points, they had talked about casting River Phoenix or Christian Slater. I would have heard Phoenix over Slater.
Yeah.
Slater's he's a little too Nicholson.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. Uh, then here's the sad part.
Oh.
Um, so James O'Barr, who created The Crow and wrote it, the comic book, he did it in response to his girlfriend having been killed by a drunk driver. And so he was going through a lot of emotional pain and he wanted to get revenge, but he knew in real life he couldn't like kill the guy.
Yeah.
So he wrote this comic about a guy getting revenge, right? Um, since after The Crow was made, the first one, 94, O'Barr said that Lee's death was like reliving his fiance's death all over again, and he regretted ever writing the comic book in the first place. So that brings us to the present day. And I think making a sequel to, or I think making a remake of this movie, this comic, is disgusting. And a key example of how craven Hollywood is, how they harvest from the carcass of broken people. Because the creator of this has said he wished he'd never even written the source material. That's how much pain it's caused him. And they made another one. And think about, they made all these sequels after this one too. Like straight to video. Like that's fucked up.
Yeah, I think it's such a fucked up thing because again, it was not as if like Brandon Lee's death was like an intentional thing. It was a legitimate accident.
But I think like James O'Barr is like, well, if I'd never written that comic, it would have never been pitched for a movie, and this guy would still be alive.
Yeah, and also this fucked up thing that like are they sending him a check every time they remake the film?
I would assume he probably has to get reimbursed in some way, unless he's explicitly like asked for the money to be diverted elsewhere. I didn't see anything about that, but just to see him say he regrets that the comic was ever written,
Yeah.
makes me think like, yeah, whoever made this new movie is a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Because like the minimum, you need to go back to the source material and read about the guy who made it, right? If it's such a personal story, and you would have seen that he went, yeah, I feel bad that I made this because somebody died as a result of it.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, let's make a new one. Like very sick to me. So yeah, The Crow, not a good movie. Very much of its time.
Yeah.
It has not aged well.
Oh no.
No, this is not something that feels modern. I was thinking of other similar, better movies. Raimi's Darkman,
Yeah.
far better movie, and just as like cheesy and
I
silly.
think it's just like this was like the poor man's Coen Brothers remake of RoboCop.
What the fuck are you?
Because,
Oh yeah, RoboCop is a movie
yes,
that is very similar.
because no, let's think about
The
it.
Coen Brothers. I know John Polito's in the movie.
No, very stylized, but also with actors that you normally would not see in main movies, right? We're talking about like Darla, like Sarah's mom, who like isn't like movie pretty,
But like,
is
no.
pretty.
Because the Coen Brothers would cast interesting actors who could do something with the part.
No, but that's why I say it's dollar store version. I'm not saying they're like this is a good dollar store version. They did the cheap version. They like went with actors that looked interesting, but just still couldn't really do the acting.
I guess I can kind of, but no, they can do the acting. That's the thing. Like Tony Todd is in this movie. He's good. Candyman.
But it's just everyone else kind of fails.
Bai Ling sucks. I will say I've never seen Lost. Anything I've seen.
Not good. Like he is just such a fucking like.
You have the names of these characters: Fun Boy, Tintin, Skank, T-Bird.
Yeah,
T-Bird was David Patrick Kelly from Twin Peaks, and Warriors come out and play. And like, yeah, he felt like he was cast because he was in Warriors.
Yeah, also he felt that man must be really typecast to always
skeezy slime bag in a gang. But yeah, I can see why somebody might have a nostalgic love of this movie.
Would have made it their whole fucking personality.
Nah, that one I can't because it's so bad. But like it's an era of movie I'm glad we're not in anymore. But I don't necessarily think we've gotten better. It feels like they've just given bigger budgets to movies like this. And also I have a feeling the new one's probably even more disgustingly violent in this way that like American movies have just become, because you think about the 80s and like Death Wish and even this with its vigilanteism, there's like they're like holding back.
Yeah.
now it just feels like movies just go all in,
Well,
and it's
yeah,
very
like,
unsettling.
you think about how and you talked about this like on the blog and on other reviews, like with movies like Nobody, John Wick, like these movies that are just supposed to be very like macho at the
Well,
end.
it's a glorification of murder.
Yeah, and it's also like this weird thing that like Eric as the Crow ends up being almost like a jokerish
Yeah,
persona
yeah.
of just being like the rules, like you said, are all over the place. At moments he's like unable to get hurt, but oh no, if the crow, meaning the animal who like he sees like through the city through their eyes, gets hurt, then he actually does get hurt.
But then
And
you're
it's
like, well,
just
where did that come from? Why does it work that way?
yeah.
Well, one thing I did read is there's a whole side character that was cut from the movie
Uh-huh.
because of his death, Brandon Lee's death. And it was, I don't know the name of the actor, but he's a very recognizable actor, and he's often in horror films. He was in, I think The Hills Have Eyes. Very tall actor with a very prominent brow, bald headed. I think he has alopecia.
Okay.
He's one of those horror character actors, and he was a character in the comic that was sort of an underworld figure that guided the Crow through all of this.
Mhm.
And because they hadn't shot those scenes and Lee died, they just cut the whole character and the actor from the movie. And I think that might have given the audience a little bit more exposition on like how does all this work? What's going on with
Yeah.
Eric? Which is why I think if you can't have that, you switch the perspective to Albrecht, and you make the Crow this distant figure that he's observing, and we're seeing a detective try to like figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, not recommending. And and the new one, I haven't seen it. I'm not going to watch it. I wouldn't recommend it either because I don't think the creator of this comic even wanted it made. Actress Myrtle Gordon is a functioning alcoholic actress who is a few days from the opening night of her latest play concerning a woman distraught about aging. One night, a car kills one of Myrtle's fans who is chasing her limousine in an attempt to get the star's attention. Myrtle internalizes the accident and goes on a spiritual quest, but fails to find the answer she is after. As opening night inches closer and closer, fragile Myrtle must find a way to make the show go on. This is Opening Night, written and directed by John Cassavetes and starring his wife, Gena Rowlands, who just recently passed away. I believe it was about a little over a week ago. So this is the second Gena Rowlands movie. Have you seen The Notebook? Because that's everybody.
No.
Okay, because that's every obituary is like star of The Notebook, and I'm like, I know why she was in The Notebook. It makes a lot of sense. Her son Nick Cassavetes directed it,
Yeah.
so that's why she was in it. But her career really blossomed through her husband's filmmaking career.
Mhm.
I don't think she was in every movie, but of the movies he made, I think a lot of the ones that she was in are the best. So this is only your second Cassavetes movie that you've seen. Previously, I think we reviewed it on the podcast, was A Woman Under the Influence.
Yes.
What did you think of that film and the filmmaking style and Rowlands in that movie?
I thought it was a great film. It is a film that I feel like you will appreciate it more the further away you are after the viewing of it, because once you kind of understand that John Cassavetes was like this guerrilla indie director, you feel the chaos of it all. Like,
And a lot of
especially
improvisation.
yeah, and there are moments that like children who happen to be his children staring directly into the camera, kind of like taking you out for a few seconds. But then you start to really think about like how good the performances were. Like, even if you had some people who weren't professionals on the screen, you had really strong actors that they were following up with, and how they're using the resources that they have, because a lot of times he would not get permits. he would just be like,
You'd film in the street
he'd
without
just
them.
film it on it and then just go.
Yeah. So this film is the second time you've seen John Cassavetes acting, because previously we saw him with Peter Falk in Elaine May's Mikey and Nicky,
Yes.
which was a similarly improvised film. Elaine May with Mike Nichols has a whole improv background. And we also have in this film Ben Gazzara, who's also a regular collaborator with Cassavetes. His big film, which you haven't seen yet, at some point we'll probably watch it, is The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, where he kind of gave him a spotlight. And a lot of people say they see, because that was the film he made just before this, I believe, and they see that as a companion piece to this. Like that's kind of exploring masculinity in the way that Opening Night's exploring femininity.
Yeah.
I'm trying to I want to talk about Rowlands, but I know it's going to be a lot when we get it. So I'll just give you some information about them. So she met John when they were both students at the American Academy. They got married in 1954. John died in 1989 of cirrhosis.
Okay.
He was a lifelong alcoholic, and so
Okay.
had been dealing with problems with that. They had 3 kids, Nick, Zoe, and Alexandria, who are all actor directors. So they've taken after the family. She remarried, I think it was some business mogul or something in 2012. So there's a big gap.
Yeah.
But John was only 59 when he died.
Okay.
And when she made this movie, as there are lots of questions of how old are you, and she doesn't answer them in the movie. What I found interesting was how old she was when she made Opening Night. She was 47 years old.
Okay.
And I think Rowlands plays her characters in a way that you're like, they could be young or they could be old. Like, it's very ambiguous. They both were big into improvisation, and they kind of came from an improvisational theater background. So the movies that he makes are ones where it's hard to tell what's written on the page and what is being developed in the middle of shooting.
Yeah.
Which is something this film kind of talks about.
Mhm.
Because we have Joan Blondell, who plays Sarah Good, this playwright of the play that Myrtle is in. And there's a conversation backstage where she tells Myrtle, all you have to do is get up there and just read the words off the page. That's what you have to do. And clearly Cassavetes is saying he knows, and he's hoping that we also understand this. Well, that's not how acting works.
Yeah.
You can't just, if all you do is get up and you read a script, you're not acting. That the script is the foundation on which the performance is built. So we start with the script. We use the script to inform our performance of what would this character do. And one thing I think is interesting is if you ever get a chance to see like photos of very serious actors and the scripts that they have, the way you'll see highlighting and notes and all these things on the side, where it's somebody who's really trying to understand the things that the character isn't saying or doing, because they want the audience to feel that that's a real person you're watching.
Mm-hmm.
So now we'll talk about Gena Rowlands a bit more. What did you think of Gena Rowlands' performance in Opening Night?
It is a stellar performance. It is one that I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of people that sit down and study it and watch it and rewatch it to see, because there's so many layers to this, which I also find it very interesting that the remark about her being a functioning alcoholic. I feel like the alcoholism wasn't really evident to me until towards the end.
But there's also a reflection of John's life
Yeah.
And I think they were very deeply in love with each other, but I think there are stories about lots of screaming matches and throwing things and breaking things, which was probably fueled through alcohol, right?
And she's such a good actress that you can't go into being like, oh, this was solely written by him. Like, there was none of her influence. There was obviously she took it with both hands, ripped it apart, and made it her own.
Which is, I think, what he wanted.
Yes.
Was he's like, I'm going to give you this, and I want to see what you do with it.
Yes. And I do love that even though this film is trying so hard to focus on an aging actress, there's something about the way Rowlands plays Myrtle just being like, that's fucking boring.
There's a resistance.
Yeah, like it's not just resistance. She's just out loud, like being like, would you do this to a fucking man without saying it?
Yeah.
Because I feel like a man would go as fucking insane as she does with how much she's hammered about aging when she's like, I'm not fucking interested in talking about aging.
Well, what would happen is if it was a story about a man, there would be this sort of nobility in aging, when for a woman, there's like a disgrace.
Well, it's also the fact that like when a man ages, this is a good time for him to get married, have children, settle down.
Or he increases in respect. There's more respect for him as he ages.
And there's ability
Yeah.
to actually go back and like fulfill your life. But with her, it's kind of like, but you lost a chance to have kids. You aren't married, so what are you? And she's like, I'm an actress. What the fuck do you want? Like, I'm supposed to be acting.
Well, I think there's interesting with layers of reality in this film.
Mhm.
And the fact that Myrtle at one point says she's lost the reality of reality.
Yeah.
Where we have, if you think about this from a meta perspective, John Cassavetes and Gena Rowlands are a husband and wife. They are playing actors who have never met each other until this job and are at very different ends of the acting spectrum. She is a famous like film star near the end of her career, and he appears to be somebody who's kind of primarily done theater work.
Yeah.
But in the play, they're playing two people who live together in a vaguely defined relationship that's sexual, but maybe not romantic, like a convenience thing. And so the fact that it's these two people who are married playing these two other things, and you just think about the complexity of making those performances work.
Yeah.
Of switching between who you're playing in the play and then who you're playing in the movie and then who you are to each other in real life and being able to turn off the real life part.
Yeah, and then like the way that Myrtle within this film is mixing her real life into what the performance is on stage. And there are moments where you don't really know yourself when reality and like fantasy starts to mix in, because she is like she's going through the halls, and at first you're like, is that the hall in the play? What is going on? And I also like the preview of sorts of what happens before a play is set up, especially if it isn't well known and it's brand new. Like, oh, they go to New Haven to act it out and practice and do with an audience so they can get comfortable in front of an audience before they go to Broadway.
Yeah. So like, even though it's called opening night, that's like the last 30 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
And it, like you're saying, yeah, most of it is previews out of town. So we put them in an environment where they're not living where they normally live. They're living in hotels. So which is already like a weird place to be in. And they're not all in the same hotel. So they're sort of separated, all the people involved. There were interesting things about how certain relationships weren't defined completely. You had David, the producer, who seems very close and has worked many times with Sarah, the screenwriter, and they're both around the same age, like mid-60s. And there were moments where I felt like there was a relationship implied there, but then other times where I'm like, what? She's in her own hotel room asleep and he's not there. But then you think about Sarah wrote this play, which is about an aging woman who lives with a man and the relationship is very ill-defined. And that's when I started to go, oh, like the amount of thought that Cassavetes put into the structure of this script and the relationships between characters and the amount of parallels that don't become like overwhelming and obvious.
Yeah.
It's just, they come to the surface as you start to think about them.
Yeah.
Because then you have a character we haven't talked about yet, who the more I've thought about that character, the more I really love that performance, which is Ben Gazzara as Manny, the director.
Yes.
He's one of those actors like Rowlands who he makes acting just look like it's easy to do. He doesn't look like he's trying. I think nowadays one of the things I kind of joke about when we talk about modern films is sort of Disney and Nickelodeonification of films, where you have people that are like so obviously acting, like shouting lines when they're trying to be funny, things like that. And this is genuine like acting, because Manny he has a job. His job is to get this play to be successful. The main crux of his work is to make sure that Myrtle will be able to go on stage opening night and perform the fucking play
Yeah.
as it is written, and she is doing everything she can not to do that.
Yeah.
And there's a great scene where he's standing in her dressing room door, and I won't do justice to his line delivery because it feels so real. It had to be it felt improvised, but coming from just such a place of truth.
Yeah.
Where he's standing in the door and he goes, "We all know that you changed every line in the play tonight." And he goes, and he just like puts his hand on his face and he's just so exasperated. He goes, "Do you ever think to yourself, Myrtle, I don't think I'm as smart as I'm actually not as smart as I think I am. Maybe I should just do what the people around me are telling me to do." Like, he's so tired. But then you have these moments where in the presence of his fucking wife, that's the thing that cracked me up so much, who's sitting there, Dorothy, and having to listen to her husband tell Myrtle, "I love you. I am so in love with you. You are amazing." And he doesn't. Like, if you see the trailer, you might think like, "Oh, is this a movie about a director having an affair with an actress?" When you watch the movie, you're like, "No, this is about a director trying to kiss this woman's ass until she just does what it is he needs her to do."
Also, like, he's conflicted because part of him is like, she's doing an amazing twist, but I will get in trouble if I said I allow
He
her
is getting
to
in
do
trouble
this.
because Sarah, the screenwriter, is constantly going like, "This woman's crazy." And like,
Yeah.
she needs to perform my play as it is written. And he understands that, like, if we hired this actress, we hired her for a reason. And it's because she's going to take your play and she's going to do something interesting with it.
Yeah.
And so what you start to realize is this is a film about the acting process disguised as a melodrama.
Yeah, and it's also this thing that, like, it's one in where I feel as if like it is an impossible thing to do now, or go like, this is the actor that would do that. I feel like the only actor that would really like try to flip the lid on something but it's not as good is Eric Norton.
Edward Norton.
Edward Norton. Because he's just like every
I
time
love your Eric Norwin.
like how for a while he was not acting because every time he wanted to be in a movie,
He wanted to rewrite the script.
Right. And then he also wanted directing credits.
Yeah.
And now I think he's gotten to the point that he's more humble about it because they're not.
You don't see him in
a
as
lot.
much stuff.
But you never hear about like an act, like it just doesn't feel like they exist anymore. And if they do exist, they're like far in between. They have to be like this weird comedy person that's getting into serious stuff that you go like, oh, they're really going all out.
There's a moment in this movie that I think kind of shows you a bit of the acting process. It's early on, and they're kind of telling you this is what this movie is going to be. And it's Myrtle is feeling very emotional after she witnesses this fan get hit and killed. And she invites Morris, who's played by John Cassavetes, her co-star in the play, up to her hotel room. And it's clear she's trying to have sex with him. And I also think Cassavetes does a great job of playing a guy who's completely disinterested in this actress in that way. Mm-hmm. And he's also like, "I'm here to do a job. I'm here to perform this play."
Yeah.
And he kind of tells her that in the play, we have to have this tension underneath the surface so that the audience isn't sure if we like each other or not. Yeah. And he goes, "If I have sex with you, that's going to ruin that tension because when we're on set, that's what we're going to think about. And that's the audience is going to feel that."
Yeah.
So he's like, "I'm just not going to do it." And she's really upset about that because it's also, if she's thinking about aging, now she's going, "Oh, is it because I'm old and withered?" And it's like, no, she's a beautiful woman. It's just, he is there for the work. Yeah. He's not there to have a relationship with her. And especially if she's supposed to be an actress coming from Hollywood, relationships on set seem to be a little more common from what I know of in film than you would see like in serious theater. Though I'm sure they exist in serious theater. But him saying that is interesting because if you pay attention to the rest of the film and scenes between them, especially when they're performing the play, it proves Morris right. The tension is there, and it culminates in what is one of the most spectacular scenes in the movie, and is just a sort of like improvisation 101 moment. Yeah. Where it's Rowlands and Cassavetes on stage performing this play for a real audience and improvising their way through the scene.
Yeah.
And it is just, if you think you've seen improv before, you've seen people doing some improv, but this is improvisation. This is what it should look like theatrically. And you realize that in the reality of the film, that scene doesn't happen if they sleep together because they can't, because she hates him at that point. Like she says something backstage is, I'm going to fucking destroy him. But what she means is, I'm going to go out on stage and I'm going to fucking act my ass off. And he like, there's scenes where you're not sure, is it Cassavetes? Is it Morris? Because of the layers of reality in this film, like laughs on stage at stuff she says.
She's so good.
And she's so mad. And it's sort of whenever it made me think of like a woman under the influence when she really is like getting intense.
Well, it's also like that she's smarter with her reactions than him. She's quicker than him at certain points, that it does make him laugh. I think it's also the protest of the scene after you watch the film is she doesn't want to do the scene that way because it leaves her vulnerable and it makes her look like a woman that doesn't have a backbone.
Because that was the scene they kept rehearsing where he smacks her.
Yes.
And she's having like a very strong trauma response to it.
Yes. And where it's like, it's only funny when you think about it is like when he goes to smack her, she like goes after him.
Yeah.
Like during the rehearsal. And it's one where you could actually see like when you hear like there were screaming matches, like she might have just been like, I don't like the genuine, he's probably telling her, give me a genuine reaction. And it's also going to be worse because there's going to be a guy playing a director saying, I have to hit you. And that you have to take the smack. Because the director keeps going like, Myrtle, we can't fake the smack. We have to hear it. And she's
because it's supposed to be a moment where the audience all goes silent and gasps.
Yeah. And she doesn't want to do it. And then there's performances where she allows it, but it's like gotten to the point like
she like breaks down.
It's like, why should we do the scene? I'm already losing. And there's like that argument that she has with the writer, who the writer was like, well, what's your problem? She's like, there's no hope. There's no hope in this fucking thing. And you want me to talk about aging?
Yeah, so it just becomes bleak at that point. I thought Rowlands felt like an animal stalking around on stage at certain points.
Yeah.
Where you just felt she was very dangerous. You didn't know what she was gonna do. The scene where because in the play, and I like how the play is fragmented for us. We never see the play chronologically play out. We see scenes repeat themselves, and I get the sense we're certainly not seeing every scene in the play.
No.
Where the opening scene of the play, I believe, is where she goes to visit her ex-husband, Gus. Mm. And he's staying in a hotel with his family and then maybe like in-laws, like brother-in-law or something. And they've come to town for a funeral, I think, because she's wearing black and a veil when she shows up. So I think she attended the funeral of a mutual friend or one of his family members and then goes by the hotel to see him. And that scene is like our opener of the play. And so it introduces this idea. And I like the first time we see that scene is the end of that scene where she's trying to get out of the room and Gus is like getting rough with her and other people in the room are kind of like wanting everybody to calm down. Mm-hmm. But I love the way Cassavetes edited where he puts us at the end of that scene. So we're not sure if Myrtle's in the play when that moment happens. And we don't know she's in the play until she goes out the door and we see she's backstage.
Yeah.
And that was where it was just such a brilliant moment where you realize Cassavetes is going to be teasing us this whole movie of he's not going to show us the setup of every scene. He's going to enter some scenes in the middle of it. And we are going to need to figure out and also come to terms with it doesn't matter if we're in the play or if we're in the movie. For Myrtle, it doesn't matter if she's in the play or the movie. For her, these are very fluid states of being.
Yeah. And
when she's done with the play, her head's still in the play. And that kind of brings us to Nancy, who is such a mysterious figure. And that is the girl who is the fan who she watches get hit and dies by a car. Nancy, it feels like something's wrong with her when she's introduced. Big crowd, everybody's asking for autographs after the previews in New Haven. And like the way Nancy spoke, I wasn't sure if she was mentally disabled or if she was like crying uncontrollably.
I think it was like crying and repeatedly saying, I love you, I love you.
It seemed like someone having like a mental breakdown.
Yeah.
Uh, and then Myrtle continues to see the specter of Nancy throughout the film, and that does have its own climax. What did you think was the significance of her continuing to see Nancy as she
I mean,
kept going?
I think this film would probably go very well with All About Eve
Hmm.
when I think about it, and especially because she is being forced to confront the fact that she is no longer this young woman. And so she imagines a person like Nancy overtaking her body and then her thoughts, or in order for her to finish this acting, or being like this idea of what she should react to, while also facing the fact that this is a young woman who, like, at some point argues to be like, I'm 18, I like sex, and I'm pretty, and it's just like, and I'm ready to fuck my way to the top kind of attitude that
Well, she
she
even kind of
gives.
gives like a monologue like that,
Yeah,
right?
and
Yeah.
so like where um
Myrtle.
Myrtle, when she's like envisioning this, is sort of like, you don't think I can outsmart you? You don't think I can destroy you? Attitude towards it, where it's kind of like she is removing herself from this idea of being a young, pretty thing anymore. If everyone is going to tell her that this is about age, then she needs to take on the full person that she is now, leave behind that little girl, right?
Well, and also I think youth was holding her back as an actress,
Yeah.
right? Because youth allows you to rely on your looks, purely on charisma. When you think about the difference between a movie star and an actor,
Yeah.
like Tom Cruise doesn't have much acting chops, in my opinion. He's an actor, but he mostly relies on his persona. And
Mhm.
and you see him do that by trying to cling to youthfulness by, dyeing his hair, probably wearing a wig, doing all these very physical action movies, right? When he's like 64 years old.
Well, it's kind of like how, well, if you see Will Smith in a movie in the past, you knew what you were going to get.
Well, and
Like, it would be playing the same character over and over again.
when I switch that to someone like an Ethan Hawke, who has allowed the types of roles he plays to change with age, but in no way is his performances diminished. In fact, I think for me, old man Ethan Hawke is a far more interesting actor than young Gen X Ethan Hawke.
Yeah.
That was I never really felt caught up in that whole era of his work. But this current era of his work, if Ethan Hawke's in something, I'm gonna pay attention. I'm probably gonna watch it just to
Yeah.
see how he does. And I think the same thing with Gena Rowlands. The work that she's remembered for is not the work she did earlier in her career. The work she's remembered for is the stuff she was doing in her 40s.
Yeah.
Because like she still has Gloria that comes out 3 years after that. So she's 50 years old when she does that. And that's probably Cassavetes' most mainstream success. And she gets to be the lead in a New York crime film where she's having shootouts with like
Yeah.
gangsters. And so I think that's kind of what Cassavetes, the reason why he constantly gravitated towards making her the center of a lot of his films was she has the authority to do that, right? Like when you
Yeah.
see her perform, it's you believe her.
Yeah, and I think it's also probably, it is this obvious film that a lot of conversations were had over it. A lot of conversations were had as to how the scene was going to be delivered, how was it going to be edited, what kind of point of view are we asking for? Because she's such a pivotal like person, where there's not really a scene without her in it,
Well, yeah,
or
she's in.
without her mention. She's like
Yeah,
in every moment. And
this
it's,
film is like a reverse Bechdel test. Is there any moment where Gena Rowlands' character isn't the
yeah, and
focus?
it's also like this interesting thing where she is not sitting down pleading for the love of men. Like the producer shows up and is just like, "Oh, I thought we would have drinks," and there's obviously like this flirty air
Well, he
that,
kisses her on the mouth.
and like he's just like, but she's kind of like, I'm tired. I don't want to do this now. And like, I also love when the director is like, I'm saying that, I've even said this in front of my wife, like, I love you, I love you. And she's kind of like, yeah, whatever. I don't give a shit. Kind of just like over it. And the arguments that she has about like in the backstage when she's talking about her process. And she's like, I can turn it on and off. And everyone's like, can you just turn it off?
Yeah.
And she's just like,
S-
no, because I'm not done.
So do you think this is about a woman having a complete mental collapse, or do you think this is just about an actor coming into their own in a new era of their life?
I think it's her coming to her own. But it's also
'Cause
like
it
this,
doesn't feel hopeless at the end. It
it
feels
doesn't
dark.
feel
Yeah.
hopeless. I think it's also this weird thing that even though you're just you don't get this sense that you want her to get sober, even though like technically that's always what I want as a character. But it's like that funny thing is like when she's going through the motions, she is fumbling behind stage. She can barely get herself up, and the director is like, leave her the fuck alone. Don't fucking touch her. Like angry at her while like the producer and the and
But
the
I also think he's like, this is what she has to do. If this is what gets the performance out of her, then let her go
and
through
like
this.
and it's this interesting thing where the producer and the writer of the play are leaving. Meanwhile, like everyone behind stage is looking at her being like, this is the best fucking performance you've ever fucking
Well, but
I love one hand was being like, I've seen a lot of people, never seen someone as drunk as you are today, but you are fucking fantastic.
one thing I liked about it is how non-judgmental Cassavetes is. And I think you think about A Woman Under the Influence, the same thing. He makes his characters unsympathetic a lot. He has his characters behaving badly a lot,
Yeah,
but he never once judges them in the film. And
no.
he's even kind of discouraging you, like, don't judge them. This is not about deciding whether this is a good or bad person. This is about observation. This is about performance. This is about watching a person go through a process and just simply taking that in.
Yeah.
And I think that's just one of the things I love about his movies. This is a movie that when I first saw it back in like 2009 or something, I did a Cassavetes marathon, and I think it's just Cassavetes that close together in a row does wear on you because it's so improvisational and loose
Yeah.
that I watched this and I feel like I just didn't pay much attention to it and I didn't like it. Having gone back and revisited it now and being able to really devote my attention to it, it's a perfect movie. Like I can't think
Yeah.
of any
It's
flaws in
like
this
it
movie.
feels chaotic because it's supposed to feel
Yes, the
chaotic.
chaos is
And
intentional.
I think you're right. You can't do a marathon of back-to-back Cassavetes films. You have to sit with them because the performances are so strong. Some of them are going to come back and like really get you because you think about A Woman Under the Influence, that is a different type of intensity. Her on the street asking someone, "Hey, can you tell me the time? Can you tell me the time?" And people not wanting to tell her the time, they keep ignoring her and she's cursing them out. And you feel like you've seen someone unravel on the street the way she's unraveling compared to this well-known high-class kind of actress who is,
But it's who's also unraveling,
who's
but in a
easily,
very different
but in
way.
a very like intelligent, almost like I have to unravel.
Yeah. Because the person she's playing is a person who's unraveling.
Yeah.
So she's sort of like, how can I play them in the play if I'm mentally stable?
Well, it's also like being like, well, why would I play them? Why would I play it exactly the way it's written? That's fucking boring. I need to find a way to make this work because if not, like she's like, my career is a death sentence and all I'm going to play are grandmothers.
Yeah. Would you recommend Opening Night to our
Yes.
listeners? Yeah, it's a long movie. It's 2 hours and 24 minutes long.
It is worth every fucking minute though.
But it is, yeah, it's one of those movies where it is long, but was never a scene where I was like dipping out. I was always interested, and I think that's due to Gena Rowlands' performance and everyone around her, also due to Cassavetes and how he chose to edit this film.
Yeah.
So there's always something new. You're always entering a scene trying to figure out where we are and what's going on. You're making connections between scenes, even if they happen like over an hour apart from each other. Like you were talking about, there's so many scenes of Myrtle walking through a green hallway that's dimly lit.
Yeah.
And sometimes she's backstage. Sometimes she's actually in a hallway, like when she goes to the like I guess it's like a Shiva or something for
Yeah.
the dead girl, and how like she shows up at that place dressed in black with a veil, which she shows dressed up in to go visit the ex-husband inside the story within the play.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and it's not a movie that's trying to do some kind of cheap psychological twist.
No.
It's using those parallels to talk about acting and performance and like the self essentially.
Mhm.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check the show notes for important links we might have mentioned, including to our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you're subscribed wherever it is you listen to podcasts so you'll be notified when our new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find out we're finishing up a little mini series of sight and sound sampling, where I'm going through and trying to fill in those movie gaps that I need to based on the recent Sight and Sound film poll of the best, I think it's like 250 movies. So next week, we'll be finishing that up for now. And the films we'll be reviewing are La Atalanta, Wanda, and Perot Le Fou. If you enjoy what we do here and on popcult.blog, we'd ask that you support us on Patreon. We have different reward levels for you to choose from. And speaking of, I want to thank our patrons, Becca and Matt, who donate at the Writers Room level. They get to pick a movie every month for me to watch and review. You can even include your own thoughts in that review if you so choose. There are also patron-exclusive podcasts, and we're going to be having a new series kicking off, I think, next week of romantic comedies. Well, also next week on the Pop Cult Podcast, we're going to be reviewing Yorgos Lanthimos' latest film, Kinds of Kindness, and more. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching.